Some women stay silent until silence becomes their revenge, until every cruel word, every belittling glance, every betrayal is chiseled into their memory like stone. And when they rise, it's not with noise but with power so quiet it deafens. Mira was the kind of woman most people overlooked. Not because she wasn't beautiful, she was in that delicate, understated way that blooms in silence. But because she carried herself like she didn't want to be seen. Her clothes were always modest. Her gaze never lingered long enough to provoke. And her bank account. At 23, it had more dust than digits. She met Daniel during her final year at university. He was everything she wasn't. Loud, confident, dressed like his wallet never stayed closed for long. His jokes came fast. So did his judgment. He noticed her in a campus group project, or rather, he noticed how useful she was. "You're good with words," he told her once, smirking. "You should be writing my essays, not yours." And she did. Mira thought he liked her. He'd touch her shoulder while leaning over her work, tell her she smelled expensive, though she knew her perfume was a clearance rack impulse. She mistook attention for affection and sarcasm for flirting. "You've done it too, haven't you? Let someone feed you crumbs and called it love. Let a man like Daniel treat your effort as his entitlement and your time as his birthright. Not because you didn't know better, but because you hoped you were wrong." The first time he joked about her apartment, she laughed. "You live here?" He blinked at the peeling paint and single cracked window. "I've seen storage units with more personality." She laughed with him. What else could she do? Pride doesn't fill a fridge. Shame doesn't pay rent. But inside, a seed began to rot. Mira worked 2 jobs while attending classes. She skipped meals to pay tuition. She sent what little she had home to her mother, who was sick more often than not. Daniel, meanwhile, bought new watches like people bought groceries. He never said, "I love you." But he said, "You're lucky I see potential in you." He never took her out in public, but he'd whisper, "You're not like the others. You're different." Different meaning hidden, convenient, useful. They slept together once, and after that he stopped texting back with the same urgency. You know the pattern. You've seen it in friends or maybe in your own reflection at 3 a.m. when silence speaks louder than any locked phone screen ever could. One evening, after Mira submitted a major thesis draft for both of them, Daniel tossed a folded receipt on her table. "Since you like working hard, here's a tip. Rich men don't marry girls who come from nothing. We date you. We leave you. That's how the story goes." It wasn't anger that consumed her. It was clarity. She didn't cry. Not then. She simply stood, picked up the receipt, and folded it into her pocket. That night, she walked 3 miles to her shift at a 24-hour diner. She scrubbed floors until her knees bled through cheap leggings. Then she walked home again, legs shaking, soul scorched. But she didn't stop. For the next 5 years, Mira worked. Not just jobs ideas. She took online coding classes during night shifts. She built an app, sold it for just enough to get noticed. Then another. Then came a contract. Then came funding. Then came silence. The kind of silence Daniel never knew how to sit in. At 29, she was a millionaire, quietly, unapologetically, powerfully. She didn't post it. She didn't flaunt it. But word travels. And parasites always find the richest hosts, don't they? Her phone lit up one humid Thursday night with a name she hadn't thought about in years, Daniel. The text read, "Hey, been a while. I saw the news. Proud of you. Want to catch up." He had no idea the message landed while she was boarding a plane to Italy. No idea she read it sipping champagne in first class in a hand-stitched suit that cost more than his car. No idea she was no longer the woman who laughed at his cruelty. And yet, part of her smiled, not because she still wanted him, but because the version of her that once did, she was finally dead. Mira didn't reply. She held her phone in her hand for a moment longer, then locked the screen and tucked it inside her silk-lined coat pocket. Outside the plane's window, the world looked so small, just like him now. Distance has a way of shrinking those who once loomed like giants in your wounded heart. The woman sitting beside her glanced over. "Business or pleasure?" she asked, smiling. Mira turned her head, her voice low and steady. "Reclamation." Because this wasn't a vacation. It was an exhale years in the making. You see, when a woman rises after being humiliated, she doesn't just succeed, she evolves. Mira hadn't just built a company. She built armor, graceful, golden, impenetrable armor forged in every overlooked moment, every dinner skipped to buy data, every night she cried into her pillow while Daniel posted photos with real women at rooftop bars. After the app that made her rich, an AI-based therapy assistant, tailored for low-income families, Mira had turned to angel investing, not for profit, but for girls like her, quiet girls, overlooked girls, girls who knew the taste of mockery and the sting of being called too plain, too soft, too poor to matter. She sat on boards now, spoke at women in tech conferences. Her name had quietly slipped into venture capital circles like a shadow that no one saw coming until it was already wrapped around them. And then came the gala. It wasn't just any gala. It was the same alumni event where Daniel would be presenting his revolutionary startup. A failing crypto venture, Mira had heard. Poor timing overpromised features zero product-market fit. But he still had that swagger, still knew how to work a room full of gullible money. She didn't need to go. But she wanted to. You might ask why. Why step back into the same arena where her scars were carved? Because sometimes healing isn't enough. Sometimes you have to return not for vengeance, but to remind the ghosts that they can't haunt you anymore. Mira walked in with poise so elegant it hushed conversations. A black gown that kissed the floor and revealed just enough to signal confidence, not need. Her hair slicked back. No jewelry except a single vintage watch, her father's. The only thing of value he left behind after dying broke. Daniel didn't recognize her at first. He was too busy laughing at his own jokes surrounded by fragile egos in tailored suits. But when he did, you could see it. The slow double take, the pause in speech, the flicker of disbelief trying to claw its way into arrogance before it crumbled. Mira, he said as if her name was a riddle he couldn't solve. She didn't flinch. Daniel, wow, you look different. You always do when you're no longer starving for someone to see you. He tried to recover, grinning. Heard you made a bit of a splash. You should have called me. I could have helped. That's when she laughed. Softly, cleanly, like something that didn't need to be loud to cut deep. You still think I needed your help? A beat of silence. His smile twitched, trying to hold. Come on, Mira, we had good times. She tilted her head. Did we? Or were you just trying on my soul, like a costume you never intended to wear? He blinked. That's dramatic. No, she said, stepping closer, voice like velvet over steel. What you did to me was dramatic. You mocked me for things I couldn't afford while stealing the one thing I gave freely, my loyalty. He was shrinking now. You could see it. The room hadn't changed, but the power had. He wasn't the storm anymore. She was. He reached for charm. Maybe we were both young. Stupid. I've changed. She smiled sadly, kindly. The kind of smile you give to a man too small to see his own reflection. So have I, she said. That's why I won't pretend to forget what you did just so you can feel like a decent man. His voice hardened. You think you're better than me now? No, Mira whispered, brushing past him. I know I am. She left him standing there. Not with fire, with silence. The kind that stays. Mira didn't look back. The marble floors of the ballroom echoed beneath her heels as she walked away from Daniel for the final time. She didn't need to run. Power doesn't hurry. And as the crowd whispered and watched, unsure what had just unfolded, Mira felt no vindication, only closure. You think revenge will feel like fireworks, don't you? Like some explosive satisfaction when you finally face the person who hurt you. But the truth, real revenge is quiet. It's a slow, dignified breath in a room where you once gasped for air. Later that evening on the rooftop terrace, she stood alone overlooking the city skyline. Her phone buzzed again, another message from him. You've changed. I don't even recognize you anymore. Just wanted to say sorry. I was an idiot. I miss us. Mira stared at the screen. Us. As if there had ever been an us. As if memory could be rewritten simply because regret had finally caught up to him. But tell me, why do they always remember your worth after you've already buried the version of yourself who once waited to be seen? She didn't reply. She didn't delete it either. She just let it sit there like a dried-up petal from a flower that no longer bloomed. In the weeks that followed, Mira returned to work with sharper clarity. She doubled down on mentoring young female founders, especially those dismissed by men like Daniel. She remembered what it was like to pitch an idea with trembling hands and watch the room roll its eyes. She remembered the sting of being told she was too emotional to lead. What they didn't realize was emotion wasn't her weakness. It was her weapon. The very thing that let her understand people read silence, sense danger, and build tech not just for profit, but for purpose. One morning, her assistant forwarded her an investor pitch from a struggling crypto company seeking funding. Attached was a name, Daniel Whitmore. She didn't laugh, she didn't gloat. Instead, she took a long sip of black coffee and wrote back, respectfully, decline. That same day, she received a hand-delivered letter, handwritten. The ink pressed into the paper too hard, like he was still trying to make an impression. Mira, I know I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I was jealous. You had nothing, and yet you were everything. I saw you working yourself raw and still shining. I was scared of you becoming more than me, so I crushed you before you could realize your power. But you became it anyway. I see that now. I hope you can find peace, even if you never find space for me again. It was the most honest thing he'd ever given her, and it was 10 years too late. Mira folded the letter neatly, then tucked it into the back of her closet, where she kept old journals, faded photos, and a single pair of worn-out sneakers from her diner days. Because some memories aren't for burning, they're for remembering just enough to never go back. And you who are still carrying someone's belittling words in your bones, what would happen if you stopped shrinking yourself to make them feel whole? What if their approval was never the prize but the trap? You don't have to yell to prove they were wrong. You don't need to post it, flaunt it, or force them to see you now. The real power comes when you can walk past them without flinching, when you no longer ache for their recognition. Mira had loved once, fiercely, foolishly. She had handed over her heart wrapped in self-doubt and called it affection. But now she didn't love like that anymore. Now she loved herself like a fortress, quiet, unshakable, patient. And if the world couldn't see the storm she had survived, that was their blindness to carry, not hers. Years passed. Mira's name became synonymous with resilience. Quietly, her influence threaded through industries that had once locked her out. She didn't sit at the table anymore, she built the table. And when others arrived, unsure if they belonged, she pulled out a chair and said, "Sit, speak, you're meant to be here." But power has a strange gravity. It draws the past back like a tide, testing, poking, begging to be acknowledged. It happened again on a gray Tuesday. She was invited to speak at a summit on ethical tech development. Big names, old money, sharp suits. The air in the conference hall smelled like ambition and perfume. On the agenda, Mira's name appeared just after a breakout session, hosted by none other than Whitmore and Blake, the now rebranded startup Daniel had clawed back to life through one last desperate pivot blockchain compliance tools. He saw her before she saw him. That much was clear. She felt the stare first, like static electricity down her spine. She turned slowly, expecting a man. But what she saw was a boy in a grown man's suit. Exhausted eyes, a half-forced smile, and a posture that leaned forward like he was waiting for permission to matter again. "Mira," he said softly, almost reverently. She nodded. "Daniel." He extended a hand. She glanced at it, then offered a polite shake, brief, firm, distant. "You're keynoting," he said, as if still trying to grasp how far she'd come. "I read your article in Forbes, the one about integrity being scalable. Powerful stuff." "Thanks," she replied. "You seemed stable." It wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. He laughed nervously. "Trying to be. We all have to grow up sometime, right?" But Mira knew some people don't grow up. They just grow tired. She should have walked away. But something in his voice, the edge of longing, the weight of regret held her there for a beat longer. "I was a coward back then," he confessed suddenly, voice low like a secret he was ashamed to carry alone. "I saw what you were becoming and I couldn't stand it. You were this storm, and I thought if I belittled you enough I could stay the bigger one." She said nothing, because what do you say to someone who tried to bury you, only to find out you were the seed? "I think about you more than I should," he continued, almost whispering. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd treated you right." That's the thing about men like Daniel. They only fantasize about who you could have been with them, not who you became without them. Mira studied him. His words were heavy, but her heart was light. "You don't miss me," she said, voice calm. "You miss the girl who hadn't figured herself out yet, the one who thought your approval was love." He flinched just slightly. And maybe she added, "You miss who you got to be around her. Superior, important, worshipped." Daniel opened his mouth, but no excuse arrived. Just air and silence. She stepped back, not in fear, in peace. "You can't resurrect what you never respected," she said. "And I'm not here to be anyone's regret fantasy." He looked smaller then. Not pathetic, just human, which in truth was all he ever was. But Mira had once made him a god, and that was her real mistake. That night, after her keynote received a standing ovation, Mira sat alone in her hotel suite, barefoot by the window, sipping tea. No tears, no triumph, just quiet. "Do you understand that kind of freedom? The kind that doesn't need to scream, 'I made it'? the kind that doesn't crave revenge or closure or even validation, just stillness. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who thought being chosen was the ultimate prize. How she would have clung to every word Daniel spoke, mistaking his guilt for growth. But this Mira didn't need to be chosen. She chose herself. And in doing so, she became untouchable. Mira flew home the next morning without telling anyone. No press release, no victory lap, just a seat by the window and a sky the color of bone. Somewhere over the Atlantic, she looked at her reflection in the glass, not the Mira that the world clapped for, but the Mira who once whispered affirmations to herself just to get through another day. The Mira who wore thrift store blazers to investor meetings. The Mira who didn't cry when Daniel mocked her apartment because crying felt like weakness, and weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. How many versions of yourself have you outlived just to survive? And how many times did you mistake silence for strength, when in truth you were just afraid no one would care if you spoke? When the plane landed, her driver was waiting with the usual polite nod. But something in Mira had shifted. She didn't want home. She wanted a reckoning. She told him to take a detour. 30 minutes later, she stood in front of the same peeling apartment complex where she once lived, back when Daniel wouldn't dare be seen holding her hand in daylight. The mailbox still leaned sideways, its hinge broken. The same graffiti stained the entry wall. But Mira didn't feel shame anymore. She felt gratitude. That tiny, forgotten place had been her crucible. It had held her, broke her, shaped her. You don't become steel unless you've been through fire. She walked up the steps, heart steady, and knocked on the door of apartment 2B. A woman answered, young, pale eyes, tight ponytail, baby on her hip, overwhelmed in a way Mira remembered too well. "Hi," Mira said gently. "I used to live here years ago. Just wanted to say thank you." The woman blinked, confused. "You're thanking the apartment?" Mira smiled. "I'm thanking the girl who survived inside it." She turned and left before the woman could ask more questions. Sometimes the most sacred things can't be explained, only felt. Back in her car, Mira pulled out her phone and opened the only photo she still kept of her and Daniel, a blurry one taken outside a bookstore during their brief, invisible, whatever that was. In the picture, he was laughing. She was looking at him like he was the sun. She deleted it, not because she hated him, but because she no longer needed to remember a version of herself who didn't know better. She didn't need closure anymore. She was the closure. And you, who are still waiting for the apology, the recognition, the return, you don't need it either. You are not owed clarity from those who thrived off your confusion. You don't have to make peace with people who built their comfort on your silence. You can simply decide, I end it here. Weeks passed. Her calendar filled. She kept building, kept mentoring, kept rising. One evening, a young intern approached her after a panel. "Ms. Alves," she stammered. I've read your story. I know about what you went through. I was in something like that too. And I guess I just wanted to ask, how do you know when you're free?" Mira studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "When you no longer wish for them to see who you've become. When you stop imagining the moment they'll regret what they did, that's when you're free." The girl's eyes welled. She nodded. And Mira walked away, leaving behind not just wisdom, but legacy. Because in the end, it was never about Daniel. It was about the woman who chose to rise from his ruins without becoming bitter. The woman who built an empire from every time she was underestimated. The woman who forgave herself for staying too long and finally loved herself enough to leave. The woman who knows her worth, doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.